All right.
Hi, everybody. Drew Chapel here from the West Side Church of Christ, and we have Peter Horne with us from Rochester, New York. And Peter, why don't you spend a couple of minutes introducing yourself?
Hey, thanks for the opportunity to hang out with you, Drew. Appreciate that. I'm from Australia, so we share a queen, and so there's that. But I came to the US in '99 to go to Harding Graduate School, and the church in Australia sponsored me to be able to go through and do that. And I went back to Australia and back to the US, went backwards and forwards for a little while between '99 and 2004, before we just the opportunities weren't there within the Australian church. And so my wife, who I met in the States, we settled down here in the US, and we've lived down south in Louisiana for a couple of years doing campus ministry before I moved up here to Rochester, New York, near Buffalo, next door to Ontario. And we've been here with the Lawson Road Church of Christ since 2008, 2009, 2009, and so over 10 years. And it's a church of, we're about 100 last time we met, and so that's been a good place for us to be.
All right, thanks, Peter. Peter and I met on Facebook, actually, and this is the first time we've actually had a vocal conversation, although we interacted quite a bit while I was on Facebook a number of years ago. So in January, we start hearing about this virus that's going to come, and it's very infectious, and it's dangerous, and it's building up steam. And by March, basically the world is shutting down. And as a minister, what was the pressing thing on your heart that you wanted to kind of like make sure of during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think, we heard this a lot. I'm not necessarily a unique thinker, but a lot of people were saying we don't go to church, we are the church. And so when that hit in March, I think that was probably my message. What does this mean for us to be the church? Trying to unpack that. If our identity as a followers of Christ has been tied to the Sunday morning assembly, and now we're assembling. We went to a YouTube worship service, so I put it together during the week, and then we all watch it together at 10:30 on Sunday morning. And some people may watch it, later than that. But and so if we're worshiping that way rather than in person, what does it mean for us to be the church? Not to be a Christian, because we can still be a Christian. We can still be good. We can still read our Bible. We can still pray, go to online church. But what does it mean for us to be a church without the Sunday gathering? So how do we work together? How do we still be a presence in our community, a light to the world? And so, there's no real easy answers to that. But it was really a question of what does this body of believers mean to individuals?
Right.
Because if Sunday morning is just a place where I come as an individual to get what I as an individual need, now when I can't come to that place, then that place and those people don't mean much to me. But if I'm being the church still, then those people mean something to me, and I'm going to connect with them and serve them, reach out to them. Anyway, so that was kind of the initial challenge that I thought we had to struggle with.
Right. I like, and that's good. I like that even before the pandemic, when we sometimes say to people who've been missing our services, we miss you. What do we mean by that? Do we miss them, their number being at the building, or do we actually miss the person, right? What do they mean to us? And I think that's a good way to put it. So your church shut down, and you were telling me before this that your family got hit with COVID quite severely, and so your church shut down a little bit earlier the second time around. And what do you miss the most during the shutdown in relation to church or ministry?
Yeah, um, I think it's the people, you know, but it's not so. It's not just the seeing the faces, like you say. You know, one of the things that I realized is Sunday morning is so important to me, for all of those 2-minute conversations I have with people as they go out the door.
Right.
My wife and I are very different. She'll have, if she doesn't have a 15, 30-minute conversation with someone, then her Sunday's a mess, you know, a wreck. You know, for me, I'll have 15 2-minute conversations. And those 2-minute conversations, just to touch base and know what's going on, and I'm applying for a job, or I'm, you know, traveling, or my daughter's, you know, traveling, whatever it might be. And it's really hard just to get that. You know, sometimes now we'll get a prayer request emailed into the office, like, oh, I'm going to be traveling back, you know, to Rochester, keep me in your prayers. I'm like, whoa, hang on, you went somewhere? How long have you been there? What are you doing there? You know, like, it's just, I miss the involvement of people's lives, you know, as well as obviously just seeing them.
Yeah, I get that. I think, yeah, it's one thing. I don't know. You say you're on YouTube, we're on YouTube, and you're preaching to a screen, you know, and a phone call here or there, you know, and it just takes up just different, right? It's
Yeah,
just different than
yeah,
so during the pandemic, where most of us are going into areas we were unfamiliar with, concerned about. But what was a way or some ways that God showed up during the shutdown that either surprised you, or at least maybe didn't surprise you, but positively blessed you or your congregation?
yeah. I mean, it's hard. I had to think about this. You gave me the questions in advance, and I was like, man, that's a tough one. Um, so I think the move to online went well. So I think that was good. I had actually at the start of the year began making these little 5-minute, 3-minute devotional videos. We were studying the Gospel of Mark, and so I was doing 3 minutes in Mark per day, and putting them up on YouTube. You know, just using my camera, and it was the first time I'd done anything like that. And so when we said, okay, we've got to do a whole service online, I was like, wow, I've already done 2 months of, you know, getting my feet wet in doing video editing and recording, and you know, so that seemed really providential at the time, and we've got, you know, I think pretty good participation in people tuning in, so that's been I think surprisingly well. But the other thing that has been encouraging is that our costs have been down. So and people have been pretty faithful in their giving, and so we've had the opportunity to give extra to the local food shelf. We've done that once, just as over the summer. We said, hey, look, we've got some money, we just want to give it to you. And then we normally give Thanksgiving baskets. Well, we ask people bring in some cans of food, and we put it together, I don't know, 5, maybe 10 baskets. This year we said, hey, can you donate? You know, it's $25, because this is the way the food shelf was doing it. $25 for a family of 5 and $50 for a family, more than 5. And I think we got over $1,000. You know, so we fed something like 30 families rather than the 5 to 10 that we usually do. And so that was great. Plus, and we've been able to give to some mission works, some extra, you know, and so that's been really nice to see us looking outside ourselves, even at a time where so much of our conversations are about ourselves.
Yeah, good. That's good. So you're a non-U.S. born minister and in a congregation of God's people. And so during the pandemic, regular concerns, big concerns, still going on. You had the unfortunate, the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor cases, among others. You have a presidential election that was, you know, in a heavily divided nation, very emotional, and even like last week we had the Capitol case and everything. So you're a non-U.S. Born minister. Your wife is American, so I didn't realize that. But how did the pandemic affect you, your congregation? How do you minister in such an emotional climate?
Yeah. I mean, it's tough. Our congregation is about 50-50 African American and white. And so, you know, during the protests in the summer, you know, there are some people that want me to be speaking up on issues of prejudice and concerns that are raised there, discrimination for African Americans and other minorities. But there are also some that are wanting to say, look, maybe the protests are not the right way of doing it, or change is happening, it's just slow, be patient. And, you know, so there's this sort of tension, and then you have, you know, obviously the killings. You know, you mentioned George Floyd. You know, I mean, people that have died, and so do we have a role in saying that's wrong? You know, or do we just say, oh, well, he asked for it, and what is the role of the church? You know, and we've kind of had to. You can't do that in person. This is again one of those things you miss, because you know, if we're in person, or if you catch me after worship, you know, I can be very sympathetic to what you're feeling, and you know, perhaps how do we think about this, and we can have a conversation. And someone may think different, but I can have a conversation with them. But the conversation is tailored for where each person is coming from. And when we have one chance in a Sunday video, should I use that to make a statement, but it's going to lack the nuance of meeting where you are. And so that statement is probably going to upset both people, or you know, certainly one group of people. So it has been challenging, and I think probably we tend to take the easy way out of just saying, oh, we're going to stick to preaching the same sermon series that we've been working our way through, and that's I don't know, I think that's selling ourselves short, you know, because this past week with the riots in Washington D.C., one of the things I said as we began worship, I sort of introduced worship, and then a little bit later I preached the sermon. But I made the point is that my view of worship, I hear a lot of people say, leave your problems at the door, we're going to focus on God now. And I really am uncomfortable with that disconnect. You know, I want to tell people, no, bring your problems to God, and let's try and work this out.
Right.
And let's try and make sense of it. Because I think as you go through Scripture, that's what God is doing, making sense of what's happening, particularly the prophets. You know, if you look at, you know, in times of dramatic change and chaos, the prophets are there to make sense of it. And I think the church has a role, but it's particularly difficult at this time, because the role is not just one statement for everyone.
Right. Yeah, I think like sometimes Canadian ministers, maybe more than American ministers, I'm not sure, but some have said to me, well, we should just concentrate on the gospel, which is true, the gospel, but I think the gospel is including what's going on in the world, right? It's good news in all ways. It's not just about individual, personal sin and rehabilitation. And so I think you're right. And it's a challenge in this pandemic. It's a challenge. Go ahead.
Yeah. I've given the example before, the command to love our neighbor. It sounds so simple, right? Love your neighbor. Oh, okay. And normally we think that means, don't do anything bad to them, or if you see them, if you're outside and your next door neighbor has fallen over, pick them up, make sure they're okay. But my neighbor on my right may like it when I extend my mowing, and take her yard, or I do her front yard or something. My neighbor on my left may be really pedantic about the length of his grass. And if I mow, I'm going to upset him, because he's got... So loving my neighbor means not just a blanket statement for, mow their grass when you get an opportunity, or snow blow their driveway, because they're different people. And so I think as churches, as we tell people, love your neighbor, well, it'd be nice if it was one size fits all and here are a specific set of actions, but how do I love my African American neighbors? How do I love my white neighbors? There may be some cultural differences and some different needs that each community has, that my love will address them in different ways. And so if the church just leaves it at love your neighbor, now go and do it, without unpacking that, I think we're again selling Christ short. We need to help each other know how to do those things.
Excellent. So I think we kind of covered number 5, but the next one, what is something that you feel your ministry, and maybe we've touched on already, or the church gained during the pandemic, that when we go back to a sense of normalcy, you don't want to lose. You want to keep that.
Yeah. So this is for me. I don't know really where your church is at, in this. So maybe I'll be teaching heresy. But for me, one of the key words here is flexibility. I think we have been, not just here, but a lot of churches of Christ, fairly static in our view of worship. So worship, the traditional teaching, right, is the 5 acts of worship. Even when we met, because we met from August to October, we didn't sing, because I think we had to be 12 feet apart for singing. So instead we listened to music. We played CDs, different things like that. Some of the CDs are groups, some of the CDs include soloists, different arrangements. Some of the soloists are men, some are women. And so I think it's been uplifting. I think they've been encouraging. We've enjoyed it. And so we sort of developed the discipline of listening to words in the songs and meditating on them. And we do that now with our YouTube worship. But if we were to go back, 18 months and said, hey, how about we have a soloist? Or how about we have a woman soloist? That would be completely shut down. And so I hope that we can come through and say, look, that was really good. And it wasn't just because it was an emergency. We heard songs that maybe we could never sing. They're just too complex. Or they're just hard to teach congregationally, or different things, and the ability to just listen and meditate on those words instead of having to worry, am I getting the right note, or am I harmonizing correctly? That was a good experience, and they were speaking to me in psalms and hymns, and I was able to hear that. So, and even just the shift to say online church is okay, is a flexibility, because we would never, we probably criticize online church 18 months ago as not the real thing. And so I hope that it broadens our horizons a little bit to say, and when we come back, we don't go back to saying, oh, great, now we can put things exactly the way they were. Because I think that we've seen that there are ways of worshiping and doing things that are different and yet effective and uplifting, and that can please God.
Yeah.
Without throwing everything out the window.
I mentioned this in one of the other interviews, but there was a French philosopher named Albert Camus, and he wrote back just after World War II, he wrote the novel The Plague, and he used his study of all these plagues through history, and he says it always comes back when a plague happens. And one of the things he ends with is, don't ever go back. Learn something new in the plague. Like, don't ever go back to the way life was. Like, always learn something. Keep, move to something new. And it was an interesting, kind of goes with that, right? Just,
yeah. And I think one of the things I realized real early on was, like, we had small groups that we have Sunday morning. We don't have Sunday night, but Sunday morning Bible class worship, Wednesday night Bible class here at the building. And then we have growth groups during the week. In homes mostly. But I realized very early on is I think we'll perhaps always offer a Zoom growth group in the future for those people that just can't get out, particularly in the winter, that can't get out and get to someone's house in the evening. And so there'll be some things I think that will carry over.
I noticed that one of the things that happened with online church, with some of my friends and some of our other members' friends, it's a hard thing to go to a church building when you've never been. It's, this was a way for them to sample it. This was a way, so some of them would tune in, and maybe they'd tune in for 10 minutes or whatever, but they're still doing it. And so even that aspect is something that we hadn't even thought about before.
Yeah, we were not doing anything online in terms of streaming, and initially it was just on YouTube. Well, then I started putting it on Facebook. Most of our members go to YouTube, and that's where the church is. But I think the first week I put it on Facebook, I remember seeing like 3 of the 5 people that looked at it for any length of time, because I was sort of monitoring who was there. 3 people were past members that had sort of stopped coming, had stuff going on in their life, and we kind of lost touch with them.
Right.
And boom, there they were, first week on Facebook, watching, and I was like, oh, that's right. Now that hasn't grown to anything, but it was just
still.
It just showed like there are ways and things we can do to connect with people that coming to the church building will never accomplish.
Okay, last question before you get to was there anything on a personal level that you saw that grew during this pandemic?
Yeah, that's other than my video editing skills. That was the first thing that came to mind. But I think just this realization of how little we can control. I think as a civilization, the 1900s, probably anyone born after the Second World War, kind of have this sense of onward and upward, growth is irresistible, improvement is going to happen. And I think, I hope, that this just says, well, not so fast, like this is, God's still in control. There are things that we can't control. And yes, we may get a vaccine, but we can't get a year back.
Right.
And
Right.
the vaccine, may last a couple of years. And if we just don't even know how long the vaccine will last, whether the virus mutates, well, so many unknowns there still. And so I think it's kind of shocked our sense of that. And so for me, it's that I think that realization of just coming back and saying we don't control as much as we think we do, and then people get cancer, and maybe that's a lesson that we learn in lots of little ways. But I just felt like as a civilization, not just a country, but that's something that we've all been reminded of.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. So you have a passage and a little lesson that you want to bless us with?
Yeah, one I did this series, sermon series. It was, I think, in around October. Anyway, doesn't matter. Maybe it was over the summer. That I called Adrift, because I just felt like that's where we were. As people, we'd kind of lost the things that were familiar: the restaurants, the window shopping at the mall, church, coming to a church building, and so we're kind of adrift. And I went back to the Old Testament and did four kind of character studies of the period from the fall of Jerusalem, looking at the prophets there, because that was really people who were adrift. And so we looked at Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and Esther. And it was interesting that each of them had a different perspective. There was no real one persistent message. But I want to just share from Ezekiel for just a moment. And Ezekiel chapter 18, starting in verse 1, says, "The word of the Lord came to me. What do you people mean by quoting this proverb about the land of Israel? The parents eat sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge." So Ezekiel is in Babylon, and apparently this proverb had arisen where people were blaming their parents. Okay, those folks that were in Jerusalem at the time the city was captured, they were evil, they were wicked, they were ungodly, they deserved to be punished. But here we are now living in Babylon, and we're the ones that are actually being punished because of what our parents did. And so God kind of has a problem with this attitude. And so in verse 18, he has this message. Let me see. It's kind of hard to know where to start here. In verse 18, his father will die for his own sin because he practiced extortion, robbed his brother, did what was wrong among his people. Yet you ask, why does the son not share the guilt of his father? Since the son has done what is just and right and has been careful to keep all my decrees, he will surely live. The one who sins is the one who will die. The child will not share the guilt of the parent, nor will the parent share the guilt of the child. The righteousness of the righteous will be credited to them, and the wickedness of the wicked will be charged against them. So the message of Ezekiel is this message to people that want to blame others. And I just see so much blame. We live in a blame society. Something bad happens, we immediately say, well, why did it happen? Who's at fault? Who can we prosecute? Who can we cancel? Who can we... And whether it be the Democrats or the Republicans or the different racial groups or whatever, it's like it's their fault. And God doesn't say they were innocent, right? Those people did stuff that was wrong. But he says they were punished for that. Now, the consequences of that, we're told elsewhere that he'll punish, right in the Ten Commandments, right? He'll punish his people to the third and fourth generation. But that those consequences may live on, but the punishment is for those that actually committed the sin. And so Ezekiel's message is, don't sit here in Babylon and be sorry for yourself and blame everyone else. His message was, take responsibility for yourself. And so I encourage our church to be introspective. Use this downtime to be introspective and say, how are my spiritual disciplines? What is my relationship with God like? Don't blame the politicians and the policies and the vaccines rolling out slowly and the lockdown is too long or too strict or this. How's your relationship with God? Yeah. Because God says it's for your sin or for your righteousness that you'll be judged. And I think that's just a challenge for all of us in this time. I know for me, the first time we canceled church, I had a pile of books. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to go home. I'm going to have nothing to do, just lock myself, and get some reading done. And it hasn't happened. I've been busier, putting together videos and preparing and all this stuff that I've been doing, busier than ever. And I think many of us might think, oh, well, I'm going to be home. My relationship with God will grow. But we probably spend more time, watching Netflix or binging on different series and doing odd jobs around the house, whatever. It just, unless we're intentional and purposeful and committed, that doesn't happen. And so we need to just take that responsibility for ourselves. And then I love, just to close, I think the famous image from Ezekiel is that of the dry bones. And we hate the deaths that have happened, and it just being confronted by death as much as we are at the moment. We often try to avoid it so much, don't we? And we can't avoid death. And so that image of dry bones, that God can restore and make things new, even in the midst of devastation, I think is that point of hope. Don't just go in your room and read and think, oh, I'm getting closer to God, but look for that hope that's coming. So.
Thank you so much. Really appreciated you spending the morning with us. As we close, I just want to close with Paul's blessing to Timothy when he says, the Lord be with your spirit and grace be with you, and praying for you and your family and the church there in Rochester. And hopefully someday we won't have to do it over Zoom and we'll be able to meet in person again. God bless you, Peter.
All right. Thanks a lot, Drew.